Katie, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for an episode of The Responsible Edge this morning. It's been a little time coming, because I think we first connected, didn't we, back in, well, it must be in the early May.
Yeah.
There we go, seasons ago. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I feel very honoured that you asked me to join the show. So thank you.
Top stuff. Right, Katie, as you well know, and as we've just discussed in our kind of pre-show catch-up, the starting place for any of our episodes is to really get to know you and to introduce you to our listeners and what's inspired you to ultimately end up doing what you're doing now. So again, feel free to start wherever you want to sort of kick things off, but we're really keen to understand, like, what are those passion points? What are those motivations from an early kind of experience perspective that have led you to do what you do?
So yeah, I've come from quite a politically charged family, I would say. So from a very early age, my mum was always very honest with us about politics and how it impacts our lives, even as kind of children, I guess, but in a way that we were able to digest. And so even from primary school, from secondary school, I just felt very passionate about social causes and politics and how that just generally has a snowball effect on how we live our lives. So yeah, when I was very first sort of entering my career, I really wanted to be a political correspondent, which I'm kind of glad I didn't do now, because there'd be quite a lot of pressure, to be honest. But yeah, I've managed to merge kind of those interests with what I do now, which is a media consultancy for the branding world. So for various kind of branding and creative design agencies. So yeah.
Fantastic. And let's go back and unpick this a bit. So in terms of those political experiences, those early political experiences, can you give us a taste of kind of those early points when you started really realizing your passion and enthusiasm for some of these causes? Can you give us some examples that you can recall growing up?
Yeah, so there's none that I can think of from like being a child or necessarily even a teenager, but there's certainly from my 20s, there's quite a few. So I was very poorly in my mid-20s. I had blood clots in my legs and in my lungs, and just generally like very, very unwell. And for a long time, I was going to the doctors and I was asking them, what's wrong with me? I really need some help physically, emotionally, and sort of spiritually. I was feeling really not well at all. And I was getting palmed off a lot for almost a year, essentially saying that there was nothing wrong with me, that it was just psychosomatic or that kind of stuff. And it turned out that I actually had loads of blood clots, as I said, in my lungs. I was very anemic. So I had to be rushed into intensive care. But that was a result of being on the pill. So that was one of my earliest kind of points where I got really passionate about how women are mistreated in the medical system and how understaffed as well the NHS was, because I saw firsthand how there was just not enough staff to basically accommodate the people that were in ITU, that I was the department that I was in. So from that, I kind of started to become very vocal. I wrote quite a few articles about how women are mistreated in the medical system, how essentially how the Tories have been culling the NHS for 15 years. And yeah, I guess that was probably one of my earliest points that I can think of now.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That sounds, I mean, yeah, that's a very personal experience that has ultimately led to, yeah, as you say, I think it's fantastic to hear that you've chosen to take action in that sense of lots of people have these sorts of experiences, but to actually go ahead and do something with that experience and try and make, positive change, I think is fantastic. Katie, and great to hear you're all better now, which is absolutely front and center. I just want to talk about the political correspondent thing. What was the attraction? I mean, obviously you'd had, these experiences growing up. You mentioned your mum, etc., regarding, politics being a core, part of your growing up. But what was it in particular about becoming a political correspondent that you were initially inspired to do, to follow?
I think I've got, without sounding kind of full of myself, I guess, I do have a really strong sense of justice, and I always have done, and I have done from when I was little to even as a teenager. So I was always very aware of politics and even kind of watching the news and that kind of stuff. So I guess I would see these segments on the TV and be really like, I want to do that. That's kind of what I want to be doing. And I really did want to do it for a long time, but as I said, I kind of didn't fall down that path, which I do think I'm quite glad for, because I potentially think I might have got too passionate about it and got maybe too involved in some things that I shouldn't have. Yeah.
So can we just unpick that a little bit? Like, what was the, what, because we want to sort of touch upon, obviously, going into the world of comms and media. Like, what was it about becoming a political correspondent that you thought, actually, that's not quite the right route? And what was it about going into comms and media, etc., that felt like the right route?
I mean, when I went into comms and media, I'll be completely honest, I kind of just fell into it a little bit. So at the time, I graduated university, and I got a job working for a Chinese herbal medicine company, which was a very weird time in my life, but I was doing their comms. And then I fell ill. So that's when I got really, really poorly. So I was off work for maybe 2.5 years, just kind of rehabilitating my body, and I couldn't physically work because I was in a wheelchair, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, then I guess from that, I then started writing for a lot of art blogs and a lot of creative blogs to try and get my writing skills back up again, because I hadn't written in a really long time. And that's how I got into comms, specifically for brands and designers and creatives. So it just was a natural segue, I guess, into that. I never really got a chance to start my political correspondent career, I guess. But I don't think it's a bad thing.
And well, I'm really excited to look at today's kind of focus for the main body of our conversation, and how actually, a lot of the work that you're now doing, you're influencing things from a different point of view, if you like, from a different sort of entry point, which we'll come on to, from a political perspective. But just then talk us about you go through a horrendous experience of those couple of years being out of work, and then you go into beginning to write again and developing your communication skills. What do you then are you working for an agency at this point? Like, where are you at in terms of kind of who you're working with?
So, as I said, I kind of started working for some local art blogs, I guess you'd call them.
Okay.
And then from there, I made a lot of connections with PR people within Brighton. So I started working, I guess, doing some sort of freelance work for very small PR agencies in Brighton. And then I started working for quite a big PR agency in Brighton, which is called Redsetter. And they represent a lot of pause. My dog's about to bark. Sorry.
You've got it. Is your dog big? It's a bit sort of too big to pick up, or can we have a little?
Do you want to see her?
Oh, yeah, definitely, 100%.
Come here. Oh.
Oh yes, a sausage.
She only has one eye.
Who's this then?
It's Pippin.
Pippin. Oh, Pippin. You'll be the star of the show.
Oh God, she loves to bark at the most inappropriate times. I'll be on the call with the client and she'll just start barking away. I'm like, Pippin, please.
Look at her.
Okay. So.
And in all honesty, do you mind if Pippin makes an appearance on the show? Or
no, she can be the star of the show, definitely. Actually, that'd be quite cute. You can definitely show her.
Well, exactly. Oh, brilliant. Okay, where were we? Let's jump back in. So yes, okay. So you worked freelance for a number of kind of PR agencies. And when you say working for, are you writing copy? Are you creating campaigns? Like, is this the sort of stuff?
Oh, it was very sort of basic. I mean, that was my entry into PR. So it was very, very basic. It was learning what a press release even was. At that point, I had no idea what PR even meant, to be perfectly honest with you, what comms really was. So I'm really grateful for those opportunities at the beginning of my career, because it just taught me so much. And yeah, I'm glad that I was able to do it with small agencies as well, because I was able to work really closely with the founders and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I learned a lot.
Doing a lot of learning. And then what moment, I mean, you've been very upfront and refreshingly open about like falling into something and falling into PR and marketing and PR and comms. What was it? What moment? Can you recall the moment when you thought to yourself, okay, I've been brought up to really, to be very thoughtful and caring from a political perspective, and there's really things that energize me from that perspective. And now I'm working in a role which actually has a massive opportunity in terms of the influence that I can have. Like, can you remember the moment when that kind of clicked and you were like, oh wow, this is brilliant. This is really what I want to do.
I can remember some specific points, definitely. for just, there were certain campaigns that were coming out when I was working at Red Setter, and there was, you probably remember the term brand purpose.
Yeah.
I just, even from the get-go, when that term started to get really popular, I think it was around 2016, it just really annoyed me. And I found it really irritating that people were talking about brand purpose, what's the purpose of this brand? And it just felt immediately tone deaf to me, and I didn't like it. And so, although I understood that the brand consultancies we were working with to a certain degree had to talk about it, it just never felt right with me, never sat right with me. And there were also a few campaigns that came out around about the same time that really just kind of compounded that feeling. So the Kendall Jenner advert, I think, is the most popular reference that everybody knows, the Pepsi one, where kind of Pepsi just solves the whole protest, and it just really annoyed me again. And so I think that really set the wheels in motion for me to be like, well, actually, a minute, how can I encourage these kind of consultancies that I'm working with to think about how they would advise their clients, which are brands and businesses, to not make such huge missteps in their marketing and their comms. Because there's huge process that you have to go through to get things signed off. And so I'd see campaigns and be like, that's gone through like 6 or 7 iterations, 6 or 7 people. How has it managed to get to this point? And so I really do think that brand consultancies are in quite a strong position to essentially be quite open with their clients and say, this isn't right, and these are the reasons why it's not right. So yeah, there was definitely a couple of points in my early time.
I've got to unpick. That's really interesting. I've got to understand and unpick when brand purpose. I mean, I think I know where this is going, but just talk us through like what was so activating to you in terms of use of that term.
I think it's because not every brand needs to have a purpose. There's, brands sometimes just are what they are. And there was a really
incredibly refreshing, Katie. Sorry, carry on. That's so refreshing and so true.
True. There was an article, I can't remember who it was now, but quite a big writer at Marketing Week wrote a really funny article talking about how mayonnaise, how Heinz in particular was trying to create a brand purpose for their mayonnaise line. And it was like, you're just yummy mayonnaise. There's no other point to you. So like, don't worry too much. Don't much too much emphasis on the fact that you need to have a purpose. But there's a difference between having brand purpose and being empathetic and socially aware towards your consumers. And I think that's what people care more about than a brand having a purpose. And so it just never really sat right with me. I'd much rather Heinz mayonnaise have something to say about the environmental landscape than the fact that they have some sort of purpose. I don't even know what their purpose was. I can't even remember, but they had one at one point.
Unbelievable. I can, it rings very true to many, many circumstances and instances that you find yourself in, where there's a sense of like lack. I know we're going to come and talk about this, especially related to the article, but almost every organization, if you were to look at brand values, or not every, but a lot of organizations out there, a lot of brand values would incorporate authenticity, showing integrity, and the whole notion of a brand purpose that goes wildly beyond the jurisdiction of what that organization is ultimately there to try and do, just breaks that authenticity down into nothingness. And why would you not want to retain that as an organization?
This is it. And I think trust is the biggest driver for consumers. And so if you're trying to shoehorn some sort of brand purpose into your messaging, also consumers aren't stupid. They're going to know when something isn't right or doesn't sit well with the general tone of your brand or the general messaging of your brand. You're going to do some reputational damage. And I think that was actually quite a big conversation around about 2016, 2017 mark, was actually brand purpose is doing a lot more damage than it is good. So I think it just needs to be rethought.
I just now want to move skirt forward, if you like, and talk about, you're working within agency, and you're obviously working with clients through agency. When did the opportunity or the thinking around helping and advising agencies themselves to better improve the way that they communicate with their clients, when did that become a thought of yours in terms of what you wanted to do next?
I don't think it was something that I necessarily thought about when I was at agencies for my clients at the time, because when you're working for an agency, you're representing the whole team. So you can't really impose too much of your personal belief on how your clients should be conducting themselves without factoring in the whole team. So I wouldn't necessarily do that there, but it was something that I definitely thought about towards the end of my time working in agency life. So now that I'm self-employed, I'm a freelancer now, I feel much more confident being able to do that because, first of all, it's much more human way to talk to your clients as well. I think they really appreciate when you're honest with them and when you kind of don't try and sugarcoat things, or when you try and help them understand how they can communicate, not necessarily to their clients, but their messaging in the media, which by default is speaking to their clients, I suppose. But yeah, I guess that was one of the main driving factors for me wanting to go freelance, was to have that autonomy to be able to do that.
And Katie, just so I'm clear, and again, we can edit this out if required, but when you were working in agency land, you were working through those agencies directly with clients who were organized, brands, etc.
So I was working for brand consultants, so it'd be brand strategists. So one of my biggest clients was Ogilvy.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
so it would be, and this is kind of my point, is that it's this weird, unique position that brand consultancies are in, where they act as that middle ground to be able to advise brands how they should be talking, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
it may seem insignificant, but actually there's a really unique opportunity for brand consultancies to position themselves to clients as being able to advise them on how they can talk on topics. Because, in a time where silence is a statement, I think brands can no longer, and businesses can no longer, be silent on certain topics that are impacting their consumers particularly, but also have kind of a global or national impact. So that's where brand consultancies, I believe, have real opportunities to come in, even create their own departments, their own teams that are dedicated to advising clients on how to navigate really tricky political waters or really sort of challenging times. So yeah, that's just a really strong belief of mine.
Okay, so and thank you for clarifying that. So essentially, when you chose to go freelance, you were essentially continuing to work with the same client, if you like, that you would be working with via agency, i.e., it's those brand consultancies, etc., that are
Yeah,
working directly with the end brand, if you like. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking me through the layman steps of that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question on that front, and it's slightly disassociated, but I think it's a really interesting. I'd be really keen to get your take on this. So we've touched upon it a few times. We've touched upon the Havas controversy of agreeing to work with Shell and taking on that contract. Obviously, and I'm massively generalizing here and probably not doing it the intricacies of it due diligence, but Havas's position was like, we want to be part of the change. We want to be working on the inside. And ultimately by doing that, we can start, influencing the way people are thinking and communicating. And that could ultimately lead to, positive outcomes in terms of the business evolving. Obviously they got absolutely hammered for that.
Yeah.
To such an extent that I think B-Corp status was revoked, or there was certainly some issues.
Offices. Yeah.
Yeah. So just give me your take on that argument from an agency perspective of, either choosing not to work with an organization based upon, what they do, or thinking or being able to present the fact that, no, we work with them to try and influence the way that they do things.
I think it's a really, really good question. And I think it would have made more sense had Shell at the time, and I don't think they did, if my memory serves me right, worked alongside some sort of organization that's outside of comms, basically, that would help them change their practices and change their internal and their external practices. So Havas can only solve one part of the problem, that is a Shell, essentially. So they can't fix the whole problem. So I think I can understand why the frustration and the criticism came in, were perhaps directed at Havas, claiming that they were going to basically be able to fix what problems that Shell had in terms of their communications, which I don't think is one part of the problem. So I think I understand why Havas took the job and why it was, why they wanted to celebrate why they'd taken the job. But perhaps, again, it's another example of it being slightly tone deaf, and maybe they should have positioned it as though it's part of a broader strategy that Shell is trying to reposition themselves as. So, but then it goes hand in hand with, when you have such a tarnished reputation, or when you have a specific reputation like Shell does, you cannot unpick that with just working with a brand consultancy. It's so complicated, and you can't necessarily solve that with just putting out a good PR campaign. You can't.
And is this the kind of refreshing, I'm getting a sense of the refreshingly honest and open and sort of direct advice that you would offer to your clients to say, look, guys, you really do need to think about, that the way that you working with a specific client positions you as an agency or a
Yeah.
consultancy, and whether or not, that rolling out in terms of the delivery of campaigns, etc., is going to serve you or not. Is that something that you find yourself advising clients on?
I have done in the past, definitely. And actually, that was even in agency life. There was a client that I was working with that was working on a gambling project. And it was for an advert for a very well-known like gambling brand. And I was actually quite early on in my career, and I really kind of encouraged my director at the time to really consider how we would go to media with it. And
Mm-hmm.
from that, there was a conversation about the fact that although it may have brought our client in a lot of money, it may not necessarily be one that they want to use as a case study of how they can work with all the type of brands they want to be working with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a very tricky conversation to have with your clients, but I guess the more honest you are about it, and if it comes from rationale and it doesn't come from just an opinionated place, but if you're coming at it with, I will happily research and help my clients understand with statistics and with reports from Edelman and that kind of stuff, why something shouldn't be positioned the way that it is. So yeah, it's a tricky one to have that conversation. I necessarily, if they still want to talk about it, then that's their decision, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, Katie, I've done the classic thing of blitzing through the getting to know you section of the show. Clearly, could carry on diving into more of the detail, but let's move on. Would you mind just introducing for our listeners the article in ESG, the report by Dean Emmerich, and just providing us with perhaps a little bit of an overview, and then pulling out whatever the most kind of interesting points that were for you within the piece?
Yeah. So the piece talks about social washing, which I really like that term. And essentially, it's discussing how we're moving on from greenwashing, we're moving on from pinkwashing, and all the things that are very, very obvious marketing tactics, essentially, that don't sit right with consumers at all anymore. And social washing is, I guess, the new one, or the one that is becoming the most prevalent issue. And that's kind of jumping on trending social issues, having one opinion on it or having a perspective on it that is tokenistic, and essentially still as a means to drive sales, or still as a means to kind of create funds for themselves. So I really like the whole point of the article essentially is that we need to really be calling out brands when they're social washing. We're able to do it when they're pink washing. People don't really do that anymore. Not as much as they used to anyway. Greenwashing, very much still in the process of understanding what that really means. I don't think people quite get entirely how to call out greenwashing or what it necessarily is still. But social washing is one that I think, yeah, it's just, I've gone off topic. Sorry, I don't know what to say.
No. It's brilliant. You've introduced it perfectly. Can you give just for absolute clarity, and it can be an example with one of your own examples, or it can be an example from the article itself, but can you just give our listeners like a flavor of exactly what social washing would be in a real world context?
Yes. So actually, yes, I annoyingly can. So I think it was the beginning of this year. I can't quite remember, but obviously we have a horrific cost of living crisis going on right now, and it's coming in ebbs and flows. There's points where it's worse than it is others. But at the beginning of the year, it was really, really bad, and people were really feeling the strain. And the Kellogg's CEO went live on television, I think it was with Sky, and he claimed that a solution to the cost of living crisis and to people who were feeling the strain, the strain of purse strings, was to eat cereal for dinner. And I think just that was in my mind when I saw that. First of all, I was like, who briefed this man and allowed him to go on Sky News? Like, who's his PR team? And secondly, it's like so tone deaf, and using a social issue that's impacting lots and lots of people, and as a means to be like, we really care about you. So how about you eat cereal for dinner? How about you eat Kellogg's for dinner? It was just so obvious and so blatant. Thankfully, it did get called out immediately. But, you know, if I was a single mother of 4 and I was watching that and I couldn't even afford a Kellogg's brand because I was having to shop, you know, supermarket zone, I would be furious if I saw that, and rightly so. And it's just as a perfect example of using a very severe social issue to essentially get people to buy your product.
Mm. So, Katie, let me ask you. We're gonna unpick this from a brilliant example, by the way, and I think I can literally recall whatever the morning show was that it was on. Can we just so how do you do this well? How does an organization ultimately go about identifying the right initiatives, the right causes to back? And then what does, backing that cause or that initiative in the right way look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm by no means claiming to have all the answers, but this is where I really do strongly believe that creative agencies, brand consultancies have an opportunity to really revolutionize what that looks like. So at the moment, AI means that a lot of brands will be using AI to create their images and that kind of stuff, which is taking away from a huge element of what brand consultancies can do and branding agencies can do. So I think there's a kind of a gap in the market where big brand consultancies or even smaller ones, doesn't really matter the size, can create teams where they're able to advise their clients, brands, businesses on how they can be talking on social topics. So it's almost like they can create their own sort of niche department, or brands and businesses can have their own internal teams and internal departments that really specialize in understanding social issues which impact their consumers and understand how they can therefore talk about that on their social media platforms, in their messaging, when they go on Sky News, that kind of stuff. So I think, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but that's kind of like a template of what I think it should look like, essentially, and how I really do believe that brand consultancies are in that unique position that not a lot of other sectors are in to be able to change that pathway.
And on, I think you've used this term a couple of times in responses, that whole notion of tone deaf, and how it's almost the starting. If we were to like be picturing, the starting place for any organization, it's before you ultimately do anything, it's making sure that you really understand the room that you're in and read the room appropriately to understand all of the social issues that affect, as you quite rightly said, your customer,
Yeah.
perhaps even your stakeholders as a broader kind of remit, and then
Yeah.
ultimately to understand how those issues really do play out in a real world context relating to what you do, so that you don't find yourself suggesting that Kellogg's what are my favorite Kellogg's? Cornflakes. Oh, I know. I love a bit of crunchy nut,
Yeah.
aren't they? But yeah, for supper, for dinner. But yes, just talk us through that. Talk us through that. What that process possibly looks like. What are the things that organizations can be doing in order to, better inform themselves, if you like?
Yeah. Again, I don't know if there's a specific answer that I can give you today, but I think it's about really investing financially in teams that are well placed to talk about that. So it may be that you start to employ people who've come from a sociology background, or you employ people internally who've come from backgrounds that are more psychology related, or or science backed, or something like that, so they can really understand how to pick apart data and help organizations understand how they can use that data to position themselves in a really empathetic and sympathetic way, but not in a patronizing way, which I think is also really important. I think brands get away a lot of the time with not talking on these topics because they often use the excuse that people don't want brands to be talking on these topics. And that's just factually not true. If you look at the statistics, it's, 8 out of 10 people believe brands to be political. So, or to have some sort of stance in a political space. So in order to do that, I think you need to broaden your internal teams and their backgrounds. Like I said, so maybe they come from a sociology background, maybe they come from a political background themselves. So it's about changing the structure, I think, of teams and the expertise that they can bring to how you then can kind of conduct the information you give to your clients.
And I think that's really interesting, because presumably there's a degree of the need for an external point of view when it comes to these things, in terms of the brand consultancies, agencies working with their clients. The clients benefit from not just having an internal team themselves of yes people, if you like, who are essentially peddling the same narrative, the same justifications, etc., that are internal to the organization itself, but actually having an external view made up of all of those different kind of perspectives that you just alluded to, helping to sort of double check, if you like, what that internal narrative and dialogue looks like. That's a really nice mechanism to just mitigate getting it totally wrong, where you really don't have a finger on the pulse. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it sounds complicated and it sounds convoluted, but it's really not.
I probably made it sound
No,
convoluted.
no, you actually didn't. In my head, I was like, I'm aware this sounds quite complicated, or it could sound quite complicated, but it's really not. It's just, I guess, adding an extra layer of R&D or research to your offering as a brand consultancy. I mean by that. So it could be that one of the offerings that you provide is a really strong R&D service, and part of that service is to be able to advise you on when best to speak up and when best to maybe shut up. So, yeah, we
had the guys from Truth on the other day, the Insight agency, and they had some really fascinating kind of insight for us. I mean, we've not really understood the insights world as before kind of the conversation with them, and they very much highlighted sort of the role that they managed to play working with their agency partners, if you like, and it was fascinating. Just record that. Katie, let me move on slightly from getting it, how we get it right from a social initiative, responsibility perspective. Let's talk about getting it wrong. So what are those main issues that are at play if an organization gets it wrong and is found to be social washing?
Well, reputational damage, that I think is really hard to come back from. I think it'd be really difficult if you were to misstep, or if you were to speak on a topic that, and this is the other thing as well, I think you have to be very aware as a brand or a business what feels natural to talk on. And if it feels completely unnatural for you, or doesn't make any sense for your brand to be talking on it, then don't. And so if you're talking on topics that are completely unrelated to anything that you stand for as a brand, then that would look bad. And I guess reputational damage, you would lose trust in consumers, which in turn would result in financial losses, which in turn would mean shareholders and stakeholders might want to pull out of funding, all that kind of stuff. So I think it could have quite a lot of impact if you were to say the wrong thing at the wrong time.
And out of interest, Katie, because I think that was really beautifully sort of summarized. I think one of the things I would throw into the mix as well is that although things like greenwashing, there is clearly like more regulation, and there's obviously fines and financial penalty essentially associated with being found to be greenwashing. I was interested to read in the article that from a social washing perspective, there is new legislation, certainly from an EU perspective, beginning to be developed, which is encouraging to see that it's maybe a little behind greenwashing, but ultimately it's going to be addressed in the same way. Let me ask you this. This is, by the way, this is very much a personal take on this, so feel free to just shoot this one down. But one of the things we talk to a lot of the organizations we're kind of working with about is the need to create a clear, succinct, identifiable narrative around your brand and around the story that you're telling. And one of the problems associated with potentially looking to share, and this is within a greenwashing context, within the context of trying to share, environmental initiatives across the whole spectrum of the things that you could possibly get involved in, is that you almost sort of dilute, if you like, the message of perhaps the areas where you are strongest. I was just questioning, like, if you end up commenting and having a position on everything as a brand, then does that lead to a slight dilution, if you like, compared to those brands that perhaps identify those specific initiatives or concerns that are most important to their customer or stakeholder base, and kind of building their strategy around addressing those, understanding that they don't have to do everything?
Exactly, 100%. And it's not, and I think that's why it can feel probably quite scary for a lot of brands and therefore brand consultancies. But again, I think that's where research teams really come in handy, because once you're able to identify the unique causes or the unique issues and concerns that your consumer base have, you then produce the topics you can talk on. You don't have to talk on every single topic. You don't have to talk on or have an opinion on everything. But I think you do. I think consumers really want their brands. Brands are very tribal. The way we interact with our brands are representations of who we are. The answer to the question is yes, and I think you need to be able to have some strong research put in place to ensure that you're not waffling on areas that are irrelevant to your consumers.
Mm-hmm. I want to address, like, I guess this, I don't know if I'm going to ask this in the right way. I might have to cut this out, but the whole thing, you perfectly introduced it at the beginning, and we were talking about, and I think the article even looks at it and says, there's the difference between essentially brands like utilizing social issues as an opportunity to present their business in a more favorable light and ultimately realize, additional profits, income, etc. as a result, which essentially is what social washing essentially is. What is therefore the difference between that and ultimately a business getting it right? Like, how does that differ? Because in all honesty, I mean, people pick out, examples of Patagonia or, other organizations of that kind of ilk, which are not viewed as necessary. They're viewed as being authentic. They're viewed as being actually saying what they said they were going to do and implementing it. But ultimately, it leads to wildly successful businesses and organizations that grow and develop and become more profitable as a result. I think one of the beautiful Patagonia ones is we want people to buy less of our stuff, and there's something wonderfully obscene within a commercial context of a brand choosing to do that, and then look at how much of an impact it's had from a growth perspective. But just touch upon, I don't think I've asked a question there, but I sometimes find myself struggling with that you're essentially saying that you get it wrong and it's called social washing, but you get it right, you still realize the same outcome, but you're just doing it with integrity. Just comment on that.
I think, I think it's very hard to define, because essentially businesses and brands want to make money and they're there to make money. And so there's going to be huge parts of their marketing campaigns and their PR, which is going to be sort of financially driven, and they want to see an ROI on that, return on investment, and what that would look like would probably be lots of money. But I think where it's different is, as I said, with the Kellogg's example, claiming to have some sympathy and empathy and understanding for your consumer's position when it's potentially like a difficult time, or their opinion on certain social and political situations. And then also claiming, I guess, almost doing it out of the goodness of your heart when it's quite obviously not. So integrity was a really good term I think you used there. But I mean, I really don't know what that would look like. You might want to scrap that altogether, because
no, I love it.
It's hard, because I understand that businesses and brands want to make money. And so I think there's going to be lots of people who are constantly going to accuse brands of jumping on topics to make money. But I guess this is where we have to change what that looks like. So at some point that might shift, and people might have to accept, or people might actually come to acknowledge that not all brands are evil, not all brands want to just make money. They actually do have purpose. No, that was it, really.
No. But Kate, I love this. I want to draw upon, and this will be like our final area to kind of focus on. I'm going to pitch to you what my take on this, and it always comes back to this. And this is like key with the work we're doing at the Charter and the organizations we're working with. Ultimately, to address this issue, transparency and radical transparency is the solution, in my opinion. And I would pitch it as this: if you are an organization that is looking to align yourself with a social cause that's important to your stakeholder base, and that you're going to create an initiative and a campaign, etc., that's going to ultimately aid that social cause, like it's going to improve it, it's going to support it, it's going to highlight it, it's going to do something to further that agenda, that's a win. If it also then leads to a load of positive, attention essentially on your brand that ultimately then realizes some positive outcomes, that's a true win-win situation. The key, I personally think, to then presenting that is to present it within a context of being truly transparent with all of your stakeholders about why you're doing things, and ultimately what you want the implications to be. Why can't we live in a world where everybody can hold up their hands and going, yeah, we're doing this for a couple of reasons. We're doing this because we think that the cause is super important and we're ultimately looking to try to achieve this outcome. And equally, it makes complete business sense for us as we look to grow and develop our brand.
How refreshing would that be? I just think that would be, if brands were to communicate like that, I just would find that so refreshing, and I would be then more likely to want to interact with that brand or interact with that business. And it's so, again, it sounds counterintuitive almost, but it's the radical transparency, like you said, where it's like we're not pretending that this isn't going to make us money. We're not pretending this isn't going to benefit us and our brand and our image in some way, but we are also acknowledging that it makes sense for us to do this. And I think that's the real difference. It's not shoehorning something where it feels weird.
And also, I almost pitch that if you adopt the social impact that your brand can have in the right way, then you can actually create a circular element to that, which is, yes, we want to support this initiative. Yes, it will help us grow and develop as a business, but that growth and development is going to enable us to then reinvest in whatever form that looks like back into those social issues again, which enables us to then further that agenda, which to me feels like, I always think of Tom's shoes as a great example of this. You know, buy a pair of shoes, we'll donate a pair of shoes. You know, it can't get more transparent and open, if you like, about the impact of engaging with that company.
And one that makes complete sense. People, there's obviously vast countries. There are lots of nations across the world where having shoes and having clothes are an absolute luxury. So if we can afford to buy them, then it makes sense for a shoe brand to then go and donate on behalf of me because I'm buying a shoe from, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting concept that it becomes circular.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, well, I think we've I've just sort of thrown my penny's worth in there as well. Sorry,
that was good. I wish I'd come up with that.
No. This is all part of the the toing and froing. Okay, I think let's finish there on looking at the article and touching upon things. Unless there's anything else that you think is really important for. In fact, no. Let me ask you this, Katie. I'm sort of wrap myself up in knots there. Let me ask you this: if there are any organisations out there, not necessarily brand consultancies and agencies, but any organisation out there who is essentially social hushing, I don't know if I'm allowed to come up with that word, i.e. they're not sharing or they're not aligning themselves with any social causes for fear, essentially, of being, having questions asked about their integrity, their authenticity because of an association with that social cause. Essentially, if they're not taking any action, okay, and they're not progressing things forward. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but what would your number one piece of advice be to them in order to sort of, move forward and perhaps begin to look at the opportunities available to them from a social cause alignment?
Yeah. Well, there was one brand consultancy that I worked with for a long time, and I really, really liked them because they encourage their clients to invest. I know I'm repeating myself, but to invest in research.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw some really great results, and they had clients who would come back time and time again because of that approach. And so I feel like I'm beating this drum, but if you don't research and you don't really understand, and it might take some time, it might take, months, even years to research the impacts of a potential, of a social cause on your consumer base, but it's such rich information that you can really use that you then necessarily can't even be accused of social washing, because you can say, actually, we've backed this up with evidence that we've been coming up with for a very long time, and we really do truly understand our consumer base, and we understand what makes them tick. So I think that's where brand consultancies should move next in terms of their offering should really be based in kind of research.
I love that. It's a really clear, succinct kind of message, if you like, and sometimes it's important to reaffirm them. So I think we've nicely touched upon the role that insight and R&D can have. Katie, can you believe we've with a few contributions from Pippin throughout, we've rattled through a good old 48 minutes worth. we always finish the show, as you know, with the magic wand question. Perhaps moving, thinking slightly sort of outside of the context, perhaps of R&D departments within branding consultancies. If I was to hand you a magic wand, Katie, and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
You know, I had time to think about this question and I didn't give it much thought, but I think it would be that people within businesses and brands and organizations feel very sort of, how can I put this? Didn't feel so restrained with what they could talk about, didn't feel so kind of shackled to their fears about how they will be perceived, or shackled to how they think their stakeholders are going to react, because obviously that's a whole other conversation in itself. But if stakeholders and shareholders have a certain type of investment, then it may not make sense to talk on certain topics. But that's probably one thing I would change, is just a bit more confidence and a bit more, radical transparency, I think, as you put it earlier on. So, because I just think it would be so refreshing. It really would.
Do you know what? I love that. I absolutely love that. And I'm going to throw my penny's worth into something in addition to that. I mean, this magic wand is going to have to be very magic for this, but I personally, I think alongside that, which I think is really compelling, somebody used the term the other day. I'm not going to say that this was mine, but they used the term. They said we need to come to a point of acceptance, and this I think was specifically looking at kind of environmental issues, but I think it can be applied to social as well. That we're all that are at times going to be clumsy, and using that term clumsy. And I think more of a kind of a societal cultural acceptance that
Yeah.
it's better to try, and it's better to engage, and it's better to invest in the dialogue, and to perhaps learn and get things wrong and be, I use that term, vulnerable within that kind of dialogue. Like, if more of us from a commercial perspective were prepared to do that, the
Yeah.
more quickly we would come to solutions, the more quickly we would develop collaborations and partnerships, etc. So I
Yeah.
think
I agree. And I think, as I said earlier on, we really are in a political landscape where staying silent is in itself an opinion. So I would rather somebody try and get it a bit wrong or be a bit clumsy with it, as you said, unless it's Kellogg's man and he comes out to them like that again. Yeah, I'd rather they at least try than stay completely silent, because that I find more worrying than someone who's at least trying.
Katie, I couldn't agree more. I think the Kellogg example, I'd go less clumsy and more cataclysmic, perhaps. So we
Yeah.
could, I think maybe that one went beyond clumsy. Katie, that has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today, and giving us some really, really clear kind of strategic insight in terms of the way that organizations can be thinking about alignment with social causes. So really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.